Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Learning Community for Family Leaders. If you haven't already, please share your name and your state or your organization in the chat box. As well as throughout today's webinar, we really encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions and to share information and resources, and also to connect with each other for peer-to-peer learning, both now and after the webinar is over. This webinar is hosted by the Family-Run Executive Director Leadership Association, better known as FREDLA, and we're a partner in the National Technical Assistance Network for Children's Behavioral Health, which is operated by and coordinated through the University of Maryland via funding from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which you know better as SAMHSA. For those that are not familiar with FREDLA or with our learning community calls, FREDLA is a network of family-run organizations. There are about 120 family-run organizations, also referred to as FROs, across the country, and they were all started by families caring for a child or young adult with mental health or behavioral health needs. FREDLA's mission is to build strong, sustainable family-run organizations and together influence policy and practice to support children and families. As I said, we are a partner in the National Training and Technical Assistance Center, and we collaborate with both state and national organizations and offer technical assistance and consultation to family-run organizations, states, and other stakeholders. My name is Millie Sweeney, and I'm the Deputy Director for FREDLA. Joining me today is Johanna Bergen, Executive Director for Youth Move National. Youth Move National is also a partner in the TA network, as well as a partner in the National Evaluation for System of Care Sites is conducted by Westat. We'd like to start by getting a feel for your experiences in the area of collaborations between family and youth in your community and in your organization through a couple of questions. So if you wouldn't mind answering the polling questions that are going to pop up on your screen. The first one is, do you have both family and youth programs in your organization? And it looks like the majority of people do have both family and youth or young adult programming going on in their organization. Okay. Let's move to our second question. Do you engage in collaborative initiatives with youth groups, programs, or organizations? Gary, I'm not sure if I'm able to show that, or do you show that
one moment, I got disconnected.
Okay.
All right, I'm back
okay.
in.
Thank you.
All right, there you go.
Thank you. Wow, 100% already. So that's good to hear. There's already a lot of collaboration going on. Second for other people to answer. Okay. Our next question, so this is 3 of 4. Are you planning to partner with a family or youth program in the future? Some immediate answers. It looks like most people are planning on doing that. We're going to talk about the benefits of that today. Just a second, if anyone else would like to answer that polling question. There's an excellent multiple choice. Okay. And our last polling question, which of the following has been the greatest challenge you've faced in collaboration or partnering? Is it shared vision or goal, recognizing and respecting strengths and expertise, equity in decision-making, or differences in language and terminology. Okay, that looks like the greatest challenge right now is equity and decision making. And that's a big one. Definitely a challenge that we see in the field. Secondly is shared vision or goal, which I think, Johanna, that's kind of what we see as well in the field, wouldn't you say?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know what's going on with you now. And thanks, Gary, for moving that around for us. Okay, today we're going to focus on defining what alignment really is, as well as what it's not. How we have seen alignment occur at 3 main levels in this work, and specific ways in which you can operationalize strategies to leverage that common ground between youth and families at the local and organizational level. I don't think we're missing a slide here with our learning objectives. Our objectives today are that you'll be able to learn some of the benefits and challenges in the alignment between the 2 movements. And Youth Move, National, and FREDLA are collaborating to address alignment. We want to share some of the things that we've learned there. We also hope to provide an opportunity for you to engage in learning and peer sharing around strategies that are useful in your community and in your organization. But I wanted to first kick off the discussion with a bit of humor. Here are 2 cartoons. You can see on the left one, the cat and the dog sitting on the couch saying, "We're just so different." And they seem to be in a therapy session. The second one has what looks to be almost like a mediation or a negotiation meeting, again between a dog and a cat. I'm not sure if you two tried, or I'm sure if you two tried, you'd find all kinds of points of contact. The point of this is that alignment can be challenging. There's different perspectives, language, different approaches, and it can even be scary because it means sharing authority and decision making, which isn't easy. However, it can also be very powerful with shared visions and united efforts toward a goal and diversity and strengths and expertise.
Thanks for kicking us off today, Millie. So again, my name is Johanna, and very glad to be with you all today, and particularly interested in what brought you to today's webinar. We know that this is a topic that is important to the field. Millie and I both provide technical assistance to a lot of youth and family organizations across the country, and we're often finding ourselves discussing alignment and working within communities to create alignment. You'll hear a little bit more about the work between FREDLA and Youth Move National throughout today's webinar. But I would start from the top that we are intentionally working to model the alignment that we're talking about. And one of the areas of insight that we're bringing to the call today is what our teams have learned as we work in alignment with each other. So I'm going to kick us off in our first section today, which is what do we mean by alignment? And as we discussed what alignment meant, we found that it was important for our teams to define what is not alignment. And so we're going to start off in a similar way today. So the FREDLA staff team and the Youth Move staff team were able to convene for an in-person meeting, and one of our discussion points was definition of alignment. We had done some preparatory work to bring our team together around the value that we wanted to work toward alignment. And during that work session, we came up with everything you're seeing on this slide in terms of what does alignment mean to us. As I review some of these things that we learned, I would really encourage you all to type into your chat box, into the chat box, things that are resonating with you, maybe something that alignment is or isn't to you or to the work that you're experiencing with your organization that we may have missed. Millie and I are frequently hosting this conversation, and our list continues to grow, and we're augmenting all parts of this discussion based on feedback from the field. So thanks for contributing to that today. So when we came together and talked about what alignment is, we determined that it is about developing shared strategies, essentially creating that Venn diagram of our shared interests and the strategies we use to accomplish our missions and visions, and to work in that overlap of the Venn diagram together. Millie spoke about sharing authority and decision-making being challenging, but sharing vision and uniting voices as being powerful. And this is really what we mean by developing shared strategies, about uniting and harnessing that shared power when our voices are strengthened by sharing the same message. Alignment includes acknowledging the importance and the existence of power and influence, and that everyone, youth and family alike, come to the table with different levels and different types of power and influence. And in a place of alignment, we need to acknowledge, see, and work with the power and influence of the others at the table. Alignment is about cohesion and about preventing particularly accidental times when we work at cross purposes. For us at Fredla and Youth Move, this might look like having transparent discussions and strategizing before we go out into a public space to push something forward, to double check that we may not accidentally be at cross purposes with each other. Does not mean that we may not have differences of opinions. We do and should, as our stakeholder perspectives are different. It's that we want to make sure that we, in a place of alignment, are not intentionally crossing each other's voices and strategies. Within alignment, we agree to acknowledge differences. Alignment is not a fairyland where we all love what everyone else says. Instead, it's about creating a shared space where differing opinions are heard and valued from where they come from. Alignment includes agreeing upon a shared language, understanding how each entity wants to be referred to, the chosen language of each entity, and honoring that choice and referring to each other in the language that we've agreed upon. We'll talk more. That's a strategy that Fredla and Youth Move used early on to practice being in alignment with each other. When we're in alignment, we purposefully and intentionally commit to some amount of shared goals. Again, not that all of our organizations or programs have the exact same goals. Most youth organizations and family organizations will have unique goals. But what are those things, those 1 or 2 or 3 goals that we share in common? Let's name them, let's write them down, and let's intentionally work towards them together. Alignment is about having respect. It's also about having each other's backs. I think about this most often when I end up in a room and I realize I'm the only person responsible for speaking up on behalf of young people. And knowing that Millie or another Fredla member is in that room and we will have each other's back without even having to ask for it, that's alignment for me in my own work. And there are many ways that can play out in our individual interactions, our agency interactions, and our organization interactions.
Yeah,
alignment does not mean...
I was just going to point out another thing from that meeting around having each other's back is if you're in a room and it's the youth perspective or the family perspective is not being voiced or is being possibly disregarded or it just needs to be spoken up, we know that whether you're with Youth Move or with Fredla, we've agreed that we will say, you might want to consider this from the family perspective as well, or you might want to consider what youth would like to see this look like as well. So we have each other's backs in terms of the work that we're doing in the field.
Definitely, Millie. And I can think about very tangible examples where I've had team members invited into a space to promote or support youth engagement efforts. And in the discussion comes up, what about caregivers? What about parent perspectives? And we have an agreement to say, have you met Fredla? Have you talked to the family-run organizations in your state? Let's make some connections. And we've been very intentional about creating space and inviting family space, and I mean effectively, to the point of bringing in new partnerships and new contracts in that way. So it feels good to have each other's back. Alignment does not mean that there isn't conflict or that there isn't tension or disagreement. In a space of alignment, however, we will have an agreed upon way and a shared approach to resolving that conflict and determining how to move forward. Matt, I see your comment, and I highly respect the reverse engineer strategy, and I'm really excited to think about where you end up in your thinking by the end of today's webinar. I think sometimes we sort of proactively plan for this rosy place where alignment's going to go very well, and we forget to ask ourselves, what are we going to do if it stops working? Or what are we going to do if a true conflict comes up? And in a place of shared negotiated alignment, we would talk about that sooner in the process. So that's very interesting to me. Alignment is action-oriented. It means we're going to do things with each other on behalf of each other towards our shared strategies. It's not I agree to just not say something bad. It's about moving forward together. Alignment is about sharing our collective data to share and spread our collective stories. And I think that's particularly exciting within both the youth and family movements. We're seeing an increased understanding of the role of evaluation and research and being able to disseminate our impact. And we'll talk a little bit more about places that Fredla and Youth Move have aligned there, and we see opportunity for your communities to align as well. Alignment is definitely about accountability. And I would argue about putting in mechanisms for shared accountability so we can each check each other and check our forward progress. And again, a place of alignment is built around collaboration, where we feel mutual and trusted in that space, and we're also actualizing our visions together. So again, this is like a lot, and we are letting alignment mean a lot. It is very fluid. We are growing in this process. We're challenging each other in this process. And there may be something that's vitally important to what alignment is that isn't on this slide, and we'd love for you to share that with us in the chat box today. We did pause in this work and ask ourselves what alignment is not. And the exact phrase that has been used over and over again and feels umbrella everything we say is that alignment does not mean that we are in lockstep with each other. There will be differences, there will be disagreement, there will be shifts and differences in the priorities that youth and family have. While we're working in alignment, a youth and family organization may identify a list of 3 shared priorities and also each have 3 totally different priorities that are not the same. And this makes sense. We have different core purposes. Our mission and vision statements are different, and we must speak and work to them. We also, if we have shared priorities, should unite our voices. We share space with each other within our systems change work, within our partnerships. And if we can maximize our power and voice to make change in those areas, when it feels good, when there's alignment, when there's common purpose and it makes sense, we can move forward together. And that's really what challenged Fredla and Youth Move, that desire to be in that type of space together to continue this alignment discussion. So we're going to open up a polling question, and this question is asking you what alignment means to you, with some of our top answers from the last time Millie and I facilitated this in person when we had flip chart paper. And we asked that you pick your top 3 of what does alignment mean to you. Oh, you guys are going into town.
Mm-hmm.
I see as you read down the list that folks are changing their answers. This is great. So for those of you who have joined us a little ways into the webinar, we're really encouraging you to make use of the chat box today. This is a complex issue, and we're all in different seats, and alignment looks differently from our seats. And we'll talk about that throughout the hour. But please go ahead and use that chat box to ask each other questions, to sort of push back on things that we're saying, to be curious with your peers. Okay, so what I'm seeing from the results, we're settling in there a little bit, is that alignment means a lot of different things to us. We're spread sort of across all of these options. And of course, if we didn't say your option, put it in the chat box, the thing that was most important to you. And this is consistent with our team's experience. This is consistent with the communities and the organizations we've facilitated this discussion within. It means a lot of different things to us. And because we have a diversity in our approach to alignment, it's really important to stay in dialogue, to document, to confirm that we understand each other's meaning and definition, and to do that early on, to really avoid pain points or conflict points where we say, but I thought you were going to have my back there and you didn't. So we want to help everyone think about their alignment definition and talk about that. So I'll point out that we definitely have a lot of folks saying that learning together is a part of the alignment process. And I totally agree with you. And all of these other things, transparency, being open to new ideas and approaches, they're important. Accepting change is a really big thing. So as we move forward, remember that alignment means a lot of things. In the slide prior, we tried to share how FREDLA and Youth Move are approaching it to model what a discussion might result in a definition within your community. Okay, so we can close the poll. I'm going to pass to Millie, who's going to start talking about these 3 levels or layers that we talk about alignment in.
Great. Thanks, Johanna. It really has been a journey that is evolving, and we learn more and more, and we try to supplement with examples and try to find better ways to work together as we go. What we've learned is that this alignment process within the movement occurs at these 3 basic levels. At the national level, which we've already started talking a little bit about between 2 national organizations. At the local level, between individual youth and family organizations, and the state and the community, and how it's aligned there, either at the state level or community by community. And that 3rd level, which I think we are all most familiar with, and where we get a lot of questions, and there's a lot of discussion and work done in technical assistance, is when you're under the same roof. And that's when youth and family programs are operating within one organization. And so we're going to spend some time strategizing around local and within an organization, how that can happen there, what some of the challenges are, and what some of the strategies that we've learned. And we're hoping that you'll share what you've learned in those areas as well. So starting with Youth Move and FREDLA at the national level, we heard from youth and family leaders across the nation who recognize that their voices are stronger when they're united and really more effectively serves the greater goal of improved services and systems. They noted that alignment needs to really happen at the leadership level first within national, state, and local organizations. sort of leading the charge and modeling how this should look together. At the national level, Fredla and Youth Move recognize that we're working in a lot of the same areas, as well as from similar area of conflict. We were getting similar calls. Fredla would receive calls from family-run organizations, and Youth Move would receive calls from youth programs and other Youth Move chapters. We realized that we were tackling the same issues, but from different perspectives. And we really listened to our members' concerns and their needs. We made a conscious choice to move from being reactive, addressing those issues as they arose, rather than being strategic and building collaborations and processes, to taking a more proactive stance involving strategic thinking and actions. Again, it is a work in progress, and we've learned a number of things along the way. I want to point out here something that a family member said when we were gathered in Ohio a couple of years ago. What they were hoping is that if both organizations, meaning youth and family organizations in their area, could come together around their strengths, we could tackle a lot of issues for children and families. That's part of the reason we do collaborative problem solving, support strengths, and the negotiating together. What we've learned in this process at the national level is that this takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes commitment to really get to a comfort level, to name difficulties or differences in priorities and perspectives, and to start working through it. And that's taken a while. When we got together in the same room, it was probably the first time, and someone immediately brought up, I really feel that we're at the place now that we hear each other, that we're comfortable saying, I don't agree with you, and here's why, and we work through it. The other thing that we've learned is to have recognition of and respect for each other's expertise and perspective. Knowing that we all have something that we bring to the table, that our experiences have led us to have different areas of interest, different priorities, and different expertise. We also learned that it's important to identify when something's not a fit and not a priority for the other person, and that's okay. We're not always going to be, as Johanna said, in lockstep, and that came up again and again. We're not always going to agree. There will be times that our priorities are different, and we need to respect when we're in that place and still figure out where we have that common ground. From the Fredla survey of family-run organizations in 2017, and we have one that's out right now, so FROs, if you have not answered that, please do so. We know that there's a significant number of family-run organizations that offer youth peer support programs. 60% of those responding to the last survey offer youth peer support programs. They employ 89 youth. They have served close to 9,000 youth, and about half of those host a youth program or a Youth Move chapter. Similarly, Youth Move's annual report found that 83% of Youth Move chapters are hosted by another agency, and 47% of their chapters partner with and or receive funding from a family-run organization. What has been super helpful is, as Johanna mentioned, sharing data with each other helps us understand each other better and helps us find those points of intersection. Youth Move has defined what affiliation looks like for their chapters and family-run organizations, and they use these definitions in gathering information in their annual reports. So they've defined what a host organization is, and that's the organization that supports the structure of the Youth Move chapter and is committed to supporting the youth-driven work of the chapters. They may have oversight or control of finances for that chapter, but there are two other levels, and one is affiliation by participating in, and that's when other partners identify a need to include youth voice in activities, and they ask chapter members to be participants and to attend to learn new information. And then that third level they defined is partner with. When your chapter is an equal partner in establishing, planning, implementing activities with other community groups or organizations. And it could be where you are receiving funds or sharing funds together. So we're learning to actually define what that can look like from each one of our perspectives.
Millie, do you mind if I add a couple of things here?
Oh, sure. Jump in.
Yeah. So I think sometimes we forget the work that we've done a little while ago, right? So Youth Move and Fredla started to share data with each other and then realized that we liked the questions and the information the other organization was receiving. So I think we're in Youth Move's third and Fredla's second round of data collection from our network where we have shared questions. So we're able to ask about offering youth peer support and have Fredla ask its membership about youth programs in a way that matches how Youth Move asks our chapter. And the information is we can analyze it in a new way because we discussed the framework and how the questions and what language would be used. And I think that that's something that we're carrying forward in all of our work. Where is this question of where does it make sense to use the same language or ask for the sort of same impact data questions to youth and family? Because seeing the changes that we're making for both groups can be important in measuring our impact. So thank you to Millie specifically, but Fredla as a whole team for doing that work with us. And then really just thinking about that last point on the slide where 47% of Youth Move chapters partner and or receive funding from a family-run organization. When we made that definition of what does it mean to partner with, and I'm going to say the words again, when your chapter is an equal partner in establishing, planning, and implementing activities with other community groups or organizations, we strengthened the definition of what partner means. And that caused our chapters to show authentically that, like, from the year to year, the number of Youth Move chapters who partnered with a family-run organization went down a touch. And we really attribute that to strengthening the partnership to equal partner. And it shifted some of our chapters to have to say, actually, we feel more like a participant in this relationship than in a partner. And we wanted to make sure we were getting that authentic information back from our network. So this discussion and topic about alignment, so we could go further with real information. So I think it was important for us to be conscious about what we meant by true collaboration and partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit on something that will come up again and again. It's intentional. You have to be intentional in finding those areas where you can work together, where you should share information. And that's a perfect example, is that we did start looking at how do we share data. Are there things that we can collect separately but will be useful in combining? And data is one of those things. And now we can crosswalk a lot of the information that we both collect and are able to use that nationally to support both what family-run organizations are doing in the family movement and what the youth movement, what their priorities are and how they're moving forward. So it's been very helpful. Other ways that this alignment shows up, or you can see that it's being demonstrated at the national level, which again is still a work in progress, we have shared funders, which provided opportunities for us to do some of these things, model the intentional work that we were doing, allowed us to collaborate on projects, to co-present in different areas, and to develop shared materials so that we can show where youth and family movements can be aligned and collaborate for a stronger voice. We have realized, obviously, the power in organizing our data together and in sharing information and working together, particularly in the intersection of peer support, because we both get a lot of technical assistance questions around this workforce and programming, and in particular, how do youth and young adult peer support providers work with family or parent peer support providers when they're within the same home? So that's something that we have been having lots of discussions around and gathering information. I think one of the most visible ways that alignment happens is we are linking presentations and modeling this for the field. Over the last year and a half or so, I would say that we do more presentations around youth and family engagement, youth and family-driven care together more than separately to showcase how we can be aligned, how those voices can be more powerful together, but also to point out that it's okay when we're not always on the same page, but we need to make sure that we respect each other's perspective. We no longer really have, if we're going to present a youth presentation and then a family presentation, but they're interwoven together. I think that's been one of the most visible things that we have done. And I'm going to turn it back over to Johanna to talk about that next level.
Sure. So Millie introduced those 3 levels we're going to talk about, so I'll shift us to local. And for local, this is the bucket of partnerships that exist between our national movement and when youth and family programming lives under one roof, one organization. So there's actually a lot of partnership models that exist in the field and local, but this is essentially if you are a part of a community where you have a family-run or a family-driven voice entity in your right hand, and you have a youth program or a youth organization or a youth entity in your left hand, however that partnership looks like, we're calling you the local level. So this happens at the state level, this happens in community levels at a lot of different jurisdictions. And when we talk about individual youth and youth-run organizations and family-run organizations working together, the following sort of challenges and opportunities came up as most important. So building partnerships, managing differences in perspectives and priorities, supporting youth, supporting families, program expectations, and decision making. And again, this is the places that these challenges and strategies came from were a convening of members of Youth Move, members, Fredla members, and system of care communities, and then augmented by the experiences we have supporting communities across the country as they live out system of care principles and values. So I want to call attention to the specific, the 2 specific challenge areas that came up as most important or prioritized most frequently, and those were building partnerships and managing differences in perspectives. So one of the things about building partnerships is that family-run and youth-run organizations are finding that they need to be intentional about building partnerships. So if we're working in children's system spaces or system of care spaces, there are oftentimes tables where we come together where members of the youth organization and members of the family organization might be at the same table. That's good, right? And that matches system of care principles. It's not necessarily intentional on the youth and family organization's behalf. And so what we're really finding is to find alignment, leadership from both of these organizations need to come together and say, I see opportunity for us to partner together. When these intentional conversations happen, they are usually documented in some sort of written partnership agreement. And you'll hear me say that a couple times today, saying, hey, here's my handshake. It'll be great to partner with you in the future. How about we keep each other in mind for future funding opportunities? Peace generally doesn't turn into this collaborative space where we're seeing collective impacts because we've come together as partners. Rather, we're really seeing the hard work of saying, what does it mean to be aligned? What are our shared priorities? And what do we mean by partnership? And documenting that in a partnership agreement or a memorandum of understanding that really has sign-off from leadership and board on both entities. That level of intentionality is really needed for this partnership to show up in the community in an impactful way. And I have great respect and gratitude for those organizations that learned that a little bit the hard way, right, and helped us learn the value of recommending those written agreements moving forward. The other area that was really important here, and again, I'm going to use the example of a system of care governance circle or governance table because I think that will be common language for our audience. We found that it was really challenging and created conflict when representatives of the youth organization and representatives of a family organization would show up at a table like a system of care governance table and say the opposite thing or speak at cross purposes, oftentimes unintentionally or because we were speaking so passionately from our own perspective, right? But it left all of our other partners and stakeholders at the table going, what do we do, right? We have two stakeholders who are essentially advising us in the opposite direction. And when we dig into that, we find that if there hadn't been discussion or connection happening outside of that governance space, that youth and family staff hadn't figured out how to speak in a way that valued the other perspective and also sort of got both positions moving forward. And so this could look as concretely as Millie and I sitting down and saying, we're in this shared space. Actually, this happens a lot, Millie, right? So I'm thinking about some work groups I'm on with Millie, right?
Yes.
It might look like, hey, before we go into that next group, I really need to talk about how Youth Move is going to show up in that space. We really need to advocate in that space to remember there are some young people who don't have biological family units supporting them. And I feel like this group really needs to hear me advocate for this young people. How is that going to show up for you, and how do you need to represent your membership? And if we can have that conversation before we come into that shared space, we can still share the perspective that we need to and that we're driven to share, and we can do so while valuing and creating space for the other perspective as well.
And I would say, Johanna, that if you don't have the opportunity to have that conversation ahead of time, just having the respect within the meeting that it's okay to have different perspectives, and intentionally having a discussion afterwards about, yeah, that didn't feel so good. Maybe we need to plan for this better, because none of us are perfect, and sometimes we, get passionate about what we're doing and get rushed from meeting to meeting and don't have that opportunity.
Definitely. And Millie, that tips in a little bit. I'll just touch briefly on decision making. At a system of care table, we really want equity in decision making, and we want to value all stakeholders' perspectives. They're there and invited into the space on purpose. And also, if we don't have a mechanism for managing disagreement or knowing where that decision making locus is, that can create friction in those opposing viewpoints. More friction than is really like required if we had worked in alignment together. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that partnerships at the local level exist in a lot of ways. We had a partner, and this is actually a strategy too. Sometimes it's really hard for a youth and family organization to sort of facilitate themselves to a place of agreement. And it is really valid to bring in a third party. And so we did that. And we'll continue to do that. So in one of the areas of discussing alignment, we brought in a third party, someone who really understood our networks, who we both could trust and respect. They did a lot of things for us. But one of the things they did was some interviews with youth and family leaders across the country. And out of that, we got lots of information. One of the things we did was identify sort of the ways partnership existed. So just so you can find yourself, we know that there are communities where a family organization hosts the youth program or even a Youth Move chapter. And so the entity is a family-run organization, and the youth voice component is a program within. We also see family organizations who are supporting a youth program in that model with the intention and with the effort for that youth program to become its own independent organization at a point in the future. So sometimes people say that's like incubating. That was Youth Move National's experience. We were supported by the National Federation of Families to grow our program structure, to develop our staff structure, and then we became an independent organization so we could have a youth-run board and be a youth-run organization. The third partnership that exists in the field is a youth organization and a family organization that exist side by side are collaborating and partnering with each other. And then the fourth partnership is where the youth organization, Millie, I'll just own that this slide is written from the youth perspective, and maybe we should have changed that, but I'll try to do it with my words. You can tell who presented on this slide last. The youth organization or the family organization exist without the other, right? All of these exist in the field. You're likely in a community, you all sort of at the top of the call told us that you're in partnership in some way, fit in one of those ways. And we're really trying to think about how do we craft these messages in a way that match the variety of partnerships that exist. And like Millie and I think, I won't speak too much for you, Millie, but I've said it in front of you and you haven't yelled yet. There is good in all of these partnership models. There is good work happening. There are different points of tension in each of these models and in each of these examples of partnership. And we're open to working in the belief that alignment can happen in all of these partnership models. They'll just look a little different.
I would agree with you at that. I think that people are at different levels, and it's very individualized as to how those collaborations occur and the goals that they have long term. It's about having that transparent conversation.
Totally. Yeah. So say we're in a local level partnership where we have two entities, youth and family. What does alignment look like at that local community level? In a lot of ways, a lot like it's looking nationally for Youth Move and FREDLA. It looks like co-presentation about going places together with youth presenters and family presenters sharing that airtime and that space. I think Millie was right when she said one of the most visible changes of this alignment work has been our frequency at which we say youth and family, and we join together in that work. That was really hard. The first time I was a part of a planning conference and they said we don't have time for a youth panel and a family panel. Like we have to pick one. And we had to say, that's not going to work with us. What if we share the stage? You know, I had to look at all of my resources and say, I don't have a presentation where we've spoken together. We're going to have to build this from scratch. And that might be happening in your community as well. So sharing that space, presenting your expertise in a shared way, that might be what alignment's looking like for you. Alignment at this local level may look like co-funding, going after funding opportunities together, saying we'll apply for this grant, we'll provide these peer support services, and we'll have youth peers and parent peers, right? Let's do it together. As Millie said earlier, FREDLA and Youth Move have found shared funding being one of the places and reasons we were able to move alignment forward together. There's something about money that really gets you to like write the agreement down, right?
We wrote that that's how we wanted to use the funding. Let's just clarify that. Not that we're required to do it.
No, right, exactly. We said, yes, right. So there will be shared money and we will do things together. We could just do things next to each other and not together. Yeah, but that personal opt-in of saying we're going to do it together. Yeah. Also, alignment looks like advocating for equitable allocation for roles and resources. I think this is something where the movement is really experiencing a fast transition to say if your state has currently been allocating X dollars, X resources, X things for family members to be involved, that X should be equal for youth to be involved. In most states, that means dollars shift. And what does that mean and where do those dollars come from? And how can youth and family organizations advocate for that allocation to be equitable? it's challenging to come to agreement around these ideas. And if we can come to them from a place of alignment and collective impact will help us all move forward, the conversations can be a little more productive.
So, Johanna,
alignment go ahead, Millie.
I'm sorry, I was going to say an example of that for those of you that are operating within systems of care. As over the years, as the proposals have come out for that, there's been a consistent shift in, do you have to have a lead family contact? Are you required to have a youth task lead? One of the ways that this can show up at the community level is to say, regardless of what the requirement is, we understand the value of having both of those things. And we want to make sure that in our system of care, structure, funding, decision-making, there's equity in these roles and these funding, regardless of requirement, because that's a system of care value. That's a value we have in collaboration. So that's an example that stands out to me that we are consistently faced with whenever the new system of care grants come out.
That's a great example, Millie. Another example that I would share is communities that have, or states that have looked at their mental health block grant committees, their state committees. There's a requirement for lived experience perspective. Some states have been very clear in having family voice at that table and adult consumer voice at that table. We're seeing more states say, if we have 2 family members at this table, we should have 2 young people, two young adults at this table with lived experience as well. And that's another example where there can be a real look at equity of voice and choice in those places. That's funny. That was my next talking point. Thanks for spurring that for me, Millie. I think alignment to within when there's 2 organizations for youth and family in a community is having really clear pathways for communication. This could be between staff and leadership at the organization, definitely in places where youth and parent peer support are being offered within the organization, very clear communication and touch points happening. Also referral pathways. A nod to where so many youth programs have grown from, it's the fact that youth came with families to meetings and to support groups and to programs, and they wanted to do something, right? And they were connecting with each other and realizing they were peers. How do we make sure that family members of the youth that Youth Move programs are serving are being connected to family supports and vice versa? Let's get clear about those referral pathways and even be proactive about those referral pathways. And then I mentioned previously, conflict is going to happen. We're going to disagree. What do we do when we disagree? And can we talk about that in our partnership and alignment definition so we know what to do when conflict arises? Which is perfect segue for your humor, Millie.
It really is. So if you have been to anything or worked with me on anything, you know I add graphics and cartoons because I just think it's a great way to convey information. So here, I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of perspective taking, and that's a crucial skill in navigating work with families and with partners and with systems. This graphic really sums up perspective taking and how we should approach the collaborative work around alignment that we've been talking about. In the graphic, both persons are looking at the same thing but have different conclusions as to what it is based on where they're standing. So neither is right, neither is wrong. It could be a 6, it could be a 9. It really is their perspective. And that's something that in this work is important, but even more so when we're talking about that third level, which is what we see very often. It's that both youth and family programs are under one organization. And that's perhaps the most fertile but often challenging ground to find the areas of collaboration is when youth and families work together within the same organization. In most instances, it tends to happen within a family-run organization, and it starts with the development of a youth or a young adult program, as Johanna talked about earlier. The slide here lists areas we've recognized as challenges and that really need to be strategized around. Decision-making, finance and budget, agency leadership, program expectations, supporting youth and young adult and family staff, and managing differences in perspective. And we've touched on a couple of these, but in particular, what we see the most that are challenging and also that have some strategies around them are decision making. Johanna talked a little bit about that, but it's about having some equity in decision making, having both youth and family representation in policy, in programming, and in funding decisions. Whether it's done through building processes, you can have levels of review of ideas or input, have that feedback loop, and making sure that there's representation in organizational decision making that reflects the perspectives and the goals and the priorities of both youth and families. It's having an intentional recognition that there should be equity. That's how that gets started. Also in program expectation, especially when you have youth and family staff that are working within the same family. The youth and the parent in the family may not have the same priorities. You know, I have a teenager. We don't always see eye to eye. And so we may approach things differently. So one of the best things you can do is to put in writing when we're working with the same family, what does that look like? What are our processes where we are going to plan with each other, we're going to debrief with each other, and we're going to make sure that we are part of modeling how you settle disputes or conflict as opposed to being part of that conflict and being drawn in ourselves. I would say the third that we see most is supporting youth and young adult and family staff. And this really comes out when you're talking about professional development dollars and the implementation of policies and procedures. A lot of times we will set aside professional development for the family staff, but not for the youth staff. And it's not the same type of professional development that's needed. There has to be a recognition that there are things that will be needed separately. The youth and young adults may need more professional development around programming, around budgeting, whereas the family staff may be more interested in learning more effective crisis intervention techniques. Or de-escalation. So having a way to make sure that there is equity in how that support is provided within the organization is very important. Johanna, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more about those.
I do, Millie, but I'm also going to go to the next slide. No, I do. I want to add a couple things first here. The chat box is really engaging for a minute here. So if everyone's willing to also multitask, because I know that's what you do every day, don't check your email, check out the chat box right now. So Millie outlined some very specific challenges and reasons for those that we need to think about, and I have some more to go in next. But I want to share first just some words from youth and family members who have engaged in some of the work we've been talking about, and really just bring their words into this conversation. So we've heard from a youth leader that the lack of a consensus building process was also a challenge. So we don't have a consensus building process in place yet. If there is a disagreement, we need to be comfortable in having that discussion. This is a young person raising, hey, we haven't figured out what to do with this discomfort yet, and really latching on that seeing that consensus building process would be value add. A family leader raised a key challenge in the national landscape is dissent around storytelling. Whose stories are these to tell, and how. We need consensus around best practices. And I think this is a really concrete example where we often talk about it as individual advocates and haven't talked about it so much as organizational and movement leaders. Our experience as young people navigating the mental health system and living with a mental health diagnosis is our story. And also our family has a story to tell as well. And as young people grow up and advocate in their own way, where does that story live? And how do I share my story without doing a disservice to the experience my family had, which wasn't necessarily my own experience? And how would my family share their experience without taking my story from them? It becomes more complicated, or in some ways it becomes more complicated as young people grow up.
And I want to point out, I just put a link in the chat box because that was such an issue that popped up. We developed a tip sheet on it about the power of telling your story and whose story is it.
Yep. Thanks,
Sorry,
Melanie.
I think I put the wrong one.
Oh, maybe you have another good link. We'll just share lots.
There is. That's a good one too, but let me find this one as well. Multitasking.
So another challenge that a family leader brought up is a challenge of having a family and youth-run organization that is administratively mature and well enough funded to sustain service delivery as well as advocacy components. And also having enough funding to measure that we're making outcomes. And it's compounded to have that maturity in organization and funding an organization to do service delivery, advocacy, outcome measurement for family and for youth. So do we have the bandwidth to do all the things we're trying to do? And amazingly, there are robust family-run organizations running robust youth programs that are able to do all of those things. And there are also organizations that are continually working on that sustainability plan. And when we're in that constant sort of search for resource, do we hold each other's voices in equity? And if we don't, we find that challenges come up in that space. I want to tip a little bit more in that direction and talk a little bit more about some specific examples of alignment under one roof. So equity and decision-making regarding program and sort of practice-level decisions is huge. And if there's not equity, there can really be a lot of tension. And in this scenario, the most common scenario when it's a family-run organization that operates a youth program, young people can really feel like they aren't equal decision makers in relation to their programs. So one thing that we know is really important in achieving alignment here is to make sure that youth leaders are able to make decisions about the youth programs that they run, and that they're able to do that with access to the financial resources and the financial information any program leader would need to have access to in order to make those decisions. So it can be incredibly frustrating to be told we can't offer that extra youth peer support group. We're out of money, right? We don't have money to add to staff a whole nother night each week. It can be frustrating for youth leaders to hear that if they didn't know they were close to tapping out the resources. So one thing that's important is like gathering those givens, being open about the financial landscape so youth leaders can make those decisions within the resources that are available. A place where decision making around program decisions where an issue can arise is if you're a family-run organization operating a youth program, right? Who makes the decisions about hiring and firing staff within the youth program? And if there is what I may call a traditional, using air quotes here, a traditional model where hiring and firing is held at sort of a high level of leadership chain of command where sort of a director is making those decisions. If those director positions are all held by family members, where is and how do you build in youth leadership, voice, and choice into those hiring and decision-making practices? That might look like having other youth program staff and youth leaders from an advisory board or youth program members part of interview committees, part of crafting interview questions, a part of that final decision-making. We've seen some really effective practices where the interview process might have youth and family representatives on it. The youth members have final veto power. So they have sort of an equal vote to say, I like candidate C best, right? But if candidate B is selected and everyone else feels like that's the best fit, the youth get final veto. And that can be a really concrete strategy to get everyone to really consider the young people's perspective before making that final decision, because we know our young people are going to have to give that final thumbs up. Similarly with firing or letting go of a staff member, losing a youth program staff member really affects the youth members. And are they going to have heard or be had a voice in that process or how those decisions are made? Again, this is one of those places that if we're reactive and in the moment trying to think about how to bring youth voice into the conversation, it's going to be a lot harder than if these are proactively discussed and outlined in an agreement or an alignment document. One of the real sticking points for this is if we are in sort of a really strong alignment place where family and youth leadership within this organization are really thinking intentionally about equity and decision-making and sharing power, there are some logistics that get in the way. So one of them that we think a lot about is that an organization, a nonprofit organization needs to have a board of directors that holds responsibility for that organization. Not only responsibility, but liability for that organization. Legally, there can't be a family board for the family-run organization and a youth board for that youth program, because the family board is responsible for that youth program. So I would recommend, and we see often, a youth advisory structure to really provide leadership and insight and guidance over that youth program. But that's not enough if we're going to say we're going to have equitable decision makers. So lots of strategies, lots of different options out there in the field. One thing where we see is that within a family-run organization board, there may be specific board slots that are always held by youth. And not just one. We always want to have stakeholders represented by more than an individual. So two or more of those seats always having a youth voice member on your board. And conversely, within that youth advisory structure, having multiple seats for family members to sit there. So our lived experience and perspective sit in those leadership decision-making places. Millie talked a little bit about professional development before. I mean, one of the huge value adds, especially of the incubator model where a family organization is really incubating a youth program into its own organization, is there's an incredible opportunity for mentorship and cross-learning and really learning how to build and run an organization going on. It's incredibly important to have a process for conflict resolution. I feel like maybe that's my soapbox for today, but just please be proactive. And I think the strategy here, and it's one that we recommend all the time when we're working with communities, is to bring in that third party. Bring in a neutral facilitator chosen by both of you that can hold space. I think it's telling that in Millie's cat and dog pictures, there was a third person in the room, right? And it wasn't a cat and it wasn't a dog. That brings a little humor to the situation, but I think it's so true. It's hard to hold space if you're one of the individuals that's affected or has a view in the situation. And in terms of So I think, we're also trying to promote the idea of youth programs becoming trauma-informed spaces. It's hard to build a sense of safety if you don't have full trust in that neutral third-party facilitator. So co-choosing, bringing someone into the discussion is not a weakness. It's really showing strength in your understanding of the value of that position.
I think that's the same is true for family having trust in that mutual person. Mm-hmm.
Yes, totally. And then when we're in alignment and we're in the same organization like this, what's our process for co-creating things? What's our process for putting guidance out to our community, to presenting to our community, something that's been vetted and created by youth and family? And let's make sure that we consciously make space to do stuff together. The youth program isn't one fun part of the budget that goes over there and does its thing. There's this interconnectivity that goes on, particularly when family-run organizations are offering services, parent peer support and youth peer support, and we're seeing this definitely happening in the field. What's our agreement if Millie and I are both providing peer support to a youth and a family unit? How do we work together in that shared space? These are things that really need to be not only figured out in terms of process and policy, but also trained for. So there's I hope you're hearing that there's so much potential when this type of entity or organization exists in a community, and also there needs to be intentionality to talk about how we work and share space and feel good and feel valued and heard in that space. Okay, moving forward a little bit to sort of continued discussion of what do we need to do to make this work? How do you go home into the organizations you each work for, partnering with youth and family and together and representing both of those stakeholders? What do we need to do? So, Millie, can I pause for just a minute? Is there anything I'm missing in the chat box that we should address before we move on?
There's some good discussion going on between people about what they want to accomplish and
okay,
suggestions. And yeah, so and,
okay,
and we
great.
can
Awesome.
make the chat. We can make the chat log available to folks.
Thank you. Okay, great. So operationalizing sounds like it's already happening in the chat box too. Okay. So really quickly, why are we talking about partnership and alignment? Because through coordinating efforts, we can unite our voices. We can use our resources of time and money and people more efficiently. We can increase our impact, which feels really important to me. There's never enough of us. We need more voices to support and champion youth and family causes. Let's do it together so we can be a little louder. When we are in a place of collaboration, of true shared space, we can get more done. We're increasing and broadening our understanding and perspectives by working in alignment and partnership, and we can really move forward our shared goals.
So those were the things that really came out, the things that Johanna just listed on the previous slide, from the gathering of youth and family leaders in Ohio a couple of years ago. What also came from that, and from the third party that we talked about that did some interviews nationally prior to that, because we really wanted to find out in the field, what were you thinking? What came from that were the values that were important in a partnership between youth and family in this movement. So overall, the themes that people identified were trust, respect, communication, drive, and passion. Those should sound somewhat familiar since that came up in our first polling questions. Where's the collaboration challenges that tend to happen? And it tends to be around these things because these are very important values. For family members, their top responses were respect and strong communication, and having that shared vision and mission. For youth, their top was also respect, but secondly, support and trust, and then transparency and honesty. that feeds over directly into what people identify as a necessary ingredient for a successful partnership. This, again, came from the same source, but also things that we have learned in this process and in providing technical assistance and hearing from you guys. That communication is absolutely necessary to have a successful partnership. Effective communication. It can't just be, I'm going to tell you what's going on. It has to be a back and forth about, what do you think about this? How can we do this together? Some of the ways that I think Johanna illuminated in how Youth Move and FREDLA have been intentionally trying to make sure that we have that communication and that understanding with each other. Another necessary ingredient for a partnership is to share resources. We've talked quite a bit about equity and to respect what each person brings to this collaboration, to respect where they've come from, where they have been, where their expertise lies. Autonomy is important, and trust to stay true to the goals and to be upfront in the collaboration that you have together. A clear vision, having something about conflict. How are you going to engage whenever you don't agree? That's a recurring theme that keeps coming up, and I don't think we can highlight that enough because we want to be more preventive, more thoughtful in how that could happen, and the best ways to resolve it. Role definition, being very clear about who does what, and when we need to share responsibilities, understanding each other, and leadership. We are the leaders going forward, and it's important that if you're going to have a successful partnership, that you not only recognize the leadership within each movement, but you work together in united leadership. Toss this back over because we've also learned about priorities through that same process. Johanna?
Yeah, and I think the priorities was really important for us to think, and as Millie, you shared earlier in the chat box, like what should we actually be doing and where should we be focusing our efforts if we are thinking about developing guidance or spending time or convening. And so we were asking these questions really like, what should FREDLA and Youth Move and other national leaders hold space for? And also like, what are you going to take home with you as family leaders and youth champions? Where's the work? And so prioritizing priorities came up as they're listed on the slide here. So establishing relationships with each other, defining those relationships, figuring out what does it mean to be here and together, and to know that we each come with our own lived experience to the table, and we might need to do our own healing or healing together in order to move forward. We were all part of a certain type of family, and we all navigated systems in a certain type of way, and that's with us. Our lived experience doesn't leave. And many of us said we maybe need to work through that as we establish our relationships together. We need to partner, just do a better job of getting each other in the room, and then really listening to each other when we're there. To partner in ways that allow us to blend authentically youth and family priorities and youth and family voices. And we said it way back, but to have each other's back and say, to call attention if there are youth in the room but not family perspectives or vice versa. Defining shared language has been huge. There's been a really conscious shift to think about what does family-driven mean? What does youth-guided and now youth-driven mean? And what does that driven word even mean in a system that has a lot of other stakeholders involved? And so consciously agreeing to language has been important. Also prioritizing just clearer communication pathways, connectivities. This concept of communicating together really brought FREDLA and Youth Move back into a room together to continue this work. an agreement to do stuff together, to identify joint activities, and to be in space together. Just the concept to say we should have time to have fun with each other was a part of a work, but also to partner in efforts to train together, to go after funding opportunities together, to be in space with each other. Prioritized around resources. How do we build relationships? How do we offer events and programs together in a way that builds all of our resources? And then to know that it's not just about youth and family perspectives, and can we work together to increase other community partners and stakeholders' involvement and bring new partners to the table to strengthen our work. So we want to leave with you some questions because we see that you're all representing different communities, and we know that you're doing this work in partnership with others within your communities. And so we have some questions for you to take home as your own reflection, and then also to use with your youth and family stakeholders and partners in your own organization. So if you're working in youth or family engagement or within a youth or family organization at the local or community level, your questions for take home are, what needs to happen in your organization regarding external collaboration? And what is needed in your community to build additional common ground? And so slides are available for you to take home. You can drop answers in the chat box too. But we really want these questions to provoke a conversation for you in your own communities.
So similarly, oops, sorry, we're both moving. Similarly, within your own organization, when you're under one roof, here are some things to consider and to take back, to think about and to discuss. What really needs to happen within your organization in terms of aligning youth and family movements, programming, and work? There's a question, have you defined alignment? Perhaps that's something to consider to kick off a conversation within your organization. And if you have defined it, is it a transparent process? And finally, what are specific steps you can take to move toward common ground internally? Again, you can definitely put that in the chat box. We want to provoke that conversation starting to happen. If it's not already, it sounds like it is in a lot of different places. But where it's not happening, here's some things to kind of get you going. I think Johanna's going to close us out.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for being with us today. I think participation today shows a commitment on your behalf to finding common ground to move forward the youth and family movements. And we just really want to ask you and challenge you to stay in this work of alignment with us. Youth Move and FREDLA are committed to this process, and we're going to continue moving forward in discussion and concrete action steps in alignment. We hope that there's been some awareness awakening in the work that you're doing or in work that you could be doing to strengthen alignment and build collaboration. And we really hope there's something that stuck with you that you can really think about and take home to your team and say, maybe we could do a better job of holding space or sharing power or giving decision-making to the family members that we're working with or the youth leaders that are a part of our program. So we hope that you take something with you. One of the young people in our convening initially about alignment said the words on the slide here today, both family and youth appreciating what each other brings to the movement, establishing partnerships when and where they can occur, and building with each other toward common goals are all what alignment looks to them. And I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of doing work together where it makes sense, about appreciating each other and creating space to hear each other and to build together. Sign me up. And I hope that you will be signed up in that commitment to do this work with Millie and I and our teams at Fredla and Youth Move and really the movements that we're representing today. Partnership and alignment and collaboration is not easy work. It's hard work. We have some resources that we've found valuable in thinking about developing partnerships. They're here. Please make use of them, share them around, and let either Millie or I know our contact information on the slides that you can download. Let us know if you're hungry for more or different resources so we can share those as well. Millie, we didn't talk about who's doing closeout. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're also very interested in how this is playing out in your community, in your state, in your organization. So we'd love to hear from you ongoing about the different strategies that you've developed and, challenges, but also how those challenges were overcome. It would be great to hear that. There are resources here, and there's 2 things for download in the file box. But also don't forget to take the survey after this. It only takes a second to do it, and it's extremely helpful for the Technical Assistance Network. Aside from that, I think that is our time for today. And I was hoping that we would have more time to go back and forth in the chat box, but this, as Johanna said early on in the presentation, is a very complex topic, and we probably could spend a couple of days just peeling apart the different layers of it. So appreciate everyone who joined today, and the Technical Assistance Network is here to help you with this process. So I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everyone.